What a treat, huh?
Great treat, you know? But I'm also watching it through his eyes and watching you, Amy, and Carl through his eyes. I just go, wow, in terms of the regularity of musicality and heartfelt that you bring. And having him join us does take it to another level of celebration.
That's right.
And in part, I think that's because, for David, this is so much second nature in a very, really beautiful way. So he inspires me to shift what I was going to talk about, to talk a little bit about the honoring of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, because I don't think I've done that. And when I see David and I listen to David, what I hear and I sing and see is the legacy of Rabbi Carlebach, somebody who grew up in a moshav that Rabbi Carlebach established largely with his congregants from the House of Love and Prayer in San Francisco. Those were the people who came to Israel in Aliyah, probably in the 70s, with this great sense of a commune, wanting to create a community between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem that could be living together as a community of song, of prayer, of arts and crafts, of celebration of the goodness of life. And Rabbi Carlebach divided his time between a synagogue on 79th Street, between West End Avenue and Riverside, just a couple buildings away from where Linda was living when I met Linda, and Jerusalem, or I should say Moshav Mavo Medi'in. So 3 quick stories to honor Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach and to prepare us for Pesach. The first is this quality of Rabbi Shlomo, most people call him Reb Shlomo, relating to each person as the focus of all his attention. He had a way, I felt, and I met him for the first time when I was 12 years old. I continued to have encounters with him in Israel. I will tell just 3 stories so as to limit my time. The first is that he was with people around him and he said to one person, you're the holiest of the holy. You're the highest of the high. And another guy in the room comes over now a little upset. And after the first guy leaves, he says, Reb Shlomo, you told me I was the highest of the high, that I was the holiest of the holy. And Reb Shlomo said, well, it's true for you and for him. For when a parent is putting a child to sleep, parent looks down at the baby and says, you're the most beautiful baby in the world. I love you more than anything in the world. That's not an expression where you're comparing. That's the deepest of the deep expression of love. And through God's eyes, when God sees each of us as a parent, God holds us and draws us near and says, you're the highest of the high. You're the most beautiful. And so that's a teaching to potentially see in others, not easy to do, a perspective of the highest of the high, God, how God, we would hope and anticipate and even believe, sees each of us as God's children. And so as we get ready for Pesach, what we're aware of is the need to separate from chametz, which is that which turns us sour. All right, I'm not going to tell 3 stories, just one story, and I'm going to riff on this story. What is chametz? Chametz is that within us that rises and fills us with pride. And when you have too much pride, too much chametz, you begin to think that whatever you achieve is due to your efforts. And that can lead to cynicism or arrogance. If you're successful, it can lead to thinking you're better than others. If you're unsuccessful, it can lead to cynicism. And so chametz, the rabbis understood as ego, that which can blind us to seeing the other as being the holiest of the holy, because we're so self-filled. We're so full of ourselves. There's that great expression of this Rabbi who comes into a room and he says, I can't go in. They said, why? There's room. He says, no, those people are so full of themselves that there's no room left in the room for me. Well, chametz is the challenge of preparation for Pesach, separating out that sense of our own self-importance, our own ego needs for self-recognition, that we don't see in the other the ability to see it through God's eyes, each person as the holiest of the holy. What is matzah? Matzah is the simplest elements put together. It's wheat, water, and very little time, and fire. And what is the nature of matzah? It lasts a long time. It doesn't spoil. If you want to set up an eruv, a boundary for Shabbat, you put a hard-boiled egg and a matzah because they're not going to spoil. And so Pesach, 6 months after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is also a time for reflection. What is it that, if you will, that covers our eyes to seeing the goodness in the world around us? And the rabbis say, in part, it's that we become too full of ourselves, too self-involved, to open up to gain another perspective. So 2 things to know. 1, ego is good. The rabbis say we only eat matzah 1 week a year. In Israel, 8 days outside, because ego also motivates us to be our best, to stretch ourselves, to try and impress in ways to bring people toward us. Ego isn't bad. It's how you use it. And it's at the same time dangerous, because you can lose track of your ego needs versus the motivation. And so Pesach and chametz being put aside is simply a retreat mode, a way to step aside, as David's song, one step out of time, to gain fresh eyes, a perspective of the basics that last, that endure, that are the ingredients, that are the essential ingredients for the staff of life. So that's to say, ours is a tradition of complexity. It's not all good or bad. It's the acknowledgement of the need for a musical string to get pulled in 2 opposite directions simultaneously. There is a time for chametz, there's a time for matzah. And to live holiday cycles is to know that you pull in 2 directions at once. But a week from now, on Saturday night, we're going to let go of the chametz, and we're just going to do matzah. And we're going to do matzah for 8 days with the hope that in burning the chametz Erev Pesach, the eve before, we will prepare ourselves to see the world anew, to see the world with the eyes of seeing the goodness, even the holiness in all that exists around us, and ultimately to look in the eyes of those closest to us and bring fresh perspective. The perspective of saying, wow, with hands on the heart, I am blessed by your presence. And then when you have said that for those who are closest to you, to expand that concentric circle and that awareness to those of community, the people you see at Trader Joe's and at the OC Kosher, and to say, those people, they are more than I give them all too often credit for. They are remarkable, each with their own story. And then, wow, wow, wow equals a holy awareness. To see all peoples and the whole of creation as that of God's, and thereby to say, how blessed I am, how blessed the world is. Hallelujah, hallelujah. May we move from Shabbat to Shabbat in preparation for Pesach, and may we say, hallelujah.